everyone, I'm Abby. Today I wanted to do something a little out of season. I've had this summer dress that I love the fabric of that I've had since college. I think I got it from Forever 21 or a similar store. It's just difficult to wear. The one string that ties around the neck and the stretchy shapeless boob area. I just stopped wearing it. So I'm going to remake it into something that I'll actually wear. Now, before I started filming, I had already seam ripped the skirt from the top, and seam ripped all the elastic parts from the gathering at the top. I had also prepped and cut the bodice lining fabric. So let's continue, shall we?
I'm using McCall's 7927 that I got practically free because it's discontinued. I think it was like 1 penny with my fabric purchase. When I cut out the lining, I modified it to fit my size, so I'm using the lining as a pattern to cut out the thicker inner lining that I've chosen to use. It's just a thick gray ponte knit kind of fabric. I wanted to have a bit more structure on top, especially with the deep neckline that I will be creating. I didn't have quite enough of the floral bodice fabric, so I found and purchased some gray lace on Etsy to use for the top. I pinned the lace in place and cut out my bodice pieces.
At this point, I hand sewed the lace onto the floral fabric. I sewed along the edge of the gray lace first. Then I turned under the floral fabric and whip stitched that in place.
I ironed fusible interfacing to the neckline facing pieces.
I sewed those together and serged the sides that would need it before moving on to the next step.
I hand basted the interlining to the fashion layer and sewed up the darts in the back. Now to attach the shoulders. The pattern calls for gathering in the front, so I sewed a loose machine stitch and pinned the gathering in place. I then machine stitched and then serged those shoulder seams. I did the same thing with the lining off camera, so now I'm pressing all the seams and darts I have so far. The interlining was pretty thick, so it wasn't laying too great on the shoulders. I chose to hand whip stitch the seam towards the back to get a smoother seam. The pattern wanted me to have the neckline facing pieces on the very inside, showing. I didn't like that idea. If I'm going to have lining, I may as well hide all the pieces under it. So I pinned the lining layer first with the facing on top of that along the neckline, so that when I turn it, the facing will be enclosed. And I machine stitched those in place and serged the edges. I turn the bodice pieces right side out, and I hand understitch all the seams so they will lay flatter. And then press them. It's an important step. Finally, I can sew up the sides. I pin them all along the side, right sides to right sides, and then machine stitch and serge those seams. Time to press again! With the bodice all sewn up, I can actually work on the skirt part again. I'm not using the pattern for this. I'm just using the skirt as is because it sits at a good place. I used the previous lining and cut it to the right length. I pinned the 4 corners so I can get the skirt to sit evenly. I'll have to add some gathers. I pinned the zipper in place. I later found out that was a bad spot for the zipper when trying it on. I needed it to sit more at the waist. Well, here we go sewing in the zipper. I sewed it in by hand and then whip stitched the lining on top of that. I hand gathered the skirt and pinned it in place. I thought this was going to be stretching, so I decided to use my favorite stretch stitch, the 3-step zigzag. I then serged the whole seam. I folded under and pinned the lining in place to encase the serged edges along the waistband. And then I hand whip stitched that in place. I found I needed a little piece of lining right at the front to hide the serged edges, so I cut a small rectangle and hand stitched that in place to encase that. Here's where I figured out my mistake with the zipper. I seam ripped and cut further into the skirt, and then I hand stitched that in place again, same method as before. This time I need to close off the top, so I hand stitched that up and whip stitched the lining in place over that and the zipper all at once.
I tried it on at this point, off camera. I found that because the skirt was so light, the bodice really doesn't fit right and would end up with wardrobe malfunctions. I really was not into that happening, so I made the decision to use the string that used to tie around the neck and make a bit of lacing at the bottom of the neckline. I think this will be really cute.
I cut 8 bits of the strip and folded those over to pin them in place. I hand sewed each and then folded under the raw edge and whip stitched that. I used a safety pin to lace the rest of the string through all of those little loops. And there we go, I have lacing. And it's complete. I think I'm going to enjoy wearing my new old dress next summer.
I gave one of my old summer dresses new life. If you have any questions or comments, be sure to let me know in the comments below. If you like sewing tutorials and costume fun, remember to subscribe to my channel. Happy sewing! Hello.